Have you ever poured your heart into something quietly, faithfully believing that one day all your effort would be seen, that someone would look up and say, "We couldn't have done this without you"? My name is Lydia Walker, and for as long as I can remember, I've been the person working behind the scenes. Maybe you know the feeling too, the way you always show up first and leave last, making sure everyone else can shine, all the while telling yourself that one day your moment will come. This is the story of how I built a life, almost an entire company, brick by invisible brick, and what happened when I finally realized I wasn't just holding up the walls. I was the very foundation. And sometimes the foundation has to choose whether to stay silent or to let the whole house feel what it's like to stand alone. I still remember the dusty sunbeams spilling through my father's workshop on Saturday mornings, the smell of sawdust and fresh coffee in the air. While other kids played house, I was busy reordering blueprints under Dad's desk, fascinated by the language of lines and numbers. It felt natural to take my place in the family business. When friends talked about scholarships or careers far away, I clung to the comfort of home, believing loyalty was its own reward. I thought if I kept working hard, taking care of the details, no one else noticed, the family would always have a place for me. That's how legacies are built, isn't it? One steady hand after another, each generation, laying down another row of bricks. But if you've ever found yourself in a family or a job or even a friendship where your effort fades into the background, you know how easily people begin to assume you'll always be there. The reliable one, the fixer, the one who doesn't need thanks because you never ask for it. At first, I wore that role like a badge of honor until the day I realized that being reliable can turn into being invisible. And sometimes being invisible means you get left out of your own story. Before I take you inside the moment my life changed, I want to ask you, have you ever wondered what would happen if you just stopped holding everything together? Would anyone notice? Would they reach out, or would the house simply creak and settle, pretending nothing's changed? Maybe like me, you've spent years telling yourself that loyalty is enough, that you don't need recognition or power or a seat at the table, just the quiet pride of a job well done. But what if I told you that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is walk away, and that it's possible in losing everything you thought you needed to discover the truth of what you're worth? That's where my story really begins. Not in the boardroom, not in the pages of a contract, but in that silent space between what we give and what we're given back. Today, I'm inviting you to join me on this journey, not just through the chaos and heartbreak of a family business gone sideways, but through the discovery that even the most reliable person can choose themselves, and in doing so, inspire others to do the same. So let's start from the beginning, where every foundation is poured and every dream is quietly waiting to be seen. Growing up in a family like mine meant learning to take your place quietly, almost before you learned to speak. My father, Henry Walker, was the kind of man whose presence filled a room, big hands, booming laugh, a mind always running 3 steps ahead. But it wasn't the noise or the swagger that kept our business alive. It was the rhythm of the everyday invoices, filed tools, sharpened coffee brewed before sunrise. My mother used to say, "If you want to know who matters most, watch who does the little things no one else notices." I never thought much about it as a child. I was happiest tucked under Dad's drafting table, scribbling my own imaginary plans on the backs of old blueprints, while the real world buzzed above me. The grown-ups made the decisions. I made sure the pencils were sharp and the sawdust didn't gather in the corners. As I grew older, that habit never left me. In high school, while my friends rushed off to soccer practice or study dates, I stayed late at the office helping my mother sort paperwork and inventory nails and bolts in the stockroom. I didn't know it then, but I was becoming the invisible glue that held our small world together. When graduation day arrived, a scholarship to a university in another state glittered in my mailbox, an open door that would have taken me somewhere new. But the business was struggling. Dad's back ached from years of heavy lifting, and the phones rang less often than they used to. I made my choice quietly, without ceremony or drama. Family first, I told myself. Loyalty, I believed, would always be its own reward. It wasn't just loyalty that kept me home, though. There was a comfort in the routine, a kind of pride in being needed, even if my name never appeared on any letterhead. I watched friends chase their dreams across the country, announcing new jobs and city adventures on social media. Sometimes I wondered what it would feel like to be that bold to take up space to be seen and celebrated. But then a neighbor would drop by asking for a quote on a kitchen remodel, or I'd catch the grateful smile on Dad's face when I fixed the printer for the third time that week. Those moments convinced me I was right where I belonged. I never asked myself if belonging should feel so small. In America, you hear a lot about legacy, the idea that each generation stands on the shoulders of the last building, something bigger, stronger, more lasting. But legacies aren't always built in broad daylight. Sometimes they're constructed in the quiet hours before dawn by the hands no one remembers to thank. I've met plenty of people over the years who've lived this story: the eldest daughter who took over her family's diner when her mother got sick, the middle son who stayed behind to care for aging parents while siblings scattered. In one small town in Nebraska, I once met a woman named Ruth who had run her father's auto shop for nearly 20 years. She managed payroll-ordered parts, soothed angry customers, all while her brother, who had moved away years before, was still listed as owner on the business cards. Ruth laughed when I asked how she felt about it. Some people build legacies with bricks and names. Some of us do it with patience and prayers. If you've ever found yourself in Ruth's shoes or mine, maybe you know how easy it is to believe that your reward will come someday, that the people you serve will notice, appreciate, promote, or just say thank you. But real life isn't always that fair. The myth of the hard worker's happy ending is everywhere in American culture, but the truth is, reliability is often mistaken for invisibility. Sometimes the more you do, the less people see. And the more essential you become, the more you're taken for granted. If you've ever waited for recognition that never arrived, I want you to know you're not alone. And you're not wrong for wanting more. There's a quiet danger in becoming indispensable behind the scenes. You can start to disappear from your own story. I learned this the hard way. When my brother Owen left for college in California, everyone missed him terribly. But when I quietly picked up his share of the chores, covered his shifts at the hardware store, and learned to manage the books, no one made a fuss. "You're so reliable, Lydia," they'd say. Thank goodness for you. Reliable became my nickname, my calling card, my armor. But sometimes armor turns into a cage, and sometimes the person holding everything together is the last to realize she's holding herself back. There's a common mistake in families and small businesses alike, assuming that the person who never complains, never demands, and always delivers will always be there. That their loyalty is limitless, their love unconditional, their needs secondary. But even the strongest bridge needs maintenance. Even the deepest well can run dry. The day I first noticed the strain was the day I forgot to order supplies for a job, something I'd never missed in 10 years. The world didn't end, but the look of disappointment on Dad's face stung more than I care to admit. For the first time, I wondered what would happen if I just stopped. The lesson here isn't just about work. It's about boundaries, self-worth, and the courage to question old stories. If we're not careful, the values that hold us together, loyalty, family, service, can become the very chains that keep us from growing. And if no one ever tells us to stop and look up, we might spend a lifetime waiting for permission to take our own place in the sun. Sometimes I think about that scholarship letter still tucked in a box somewhere under my bed. It's a reminder that every path has 1,000 forks, and every choice costs something. I don't regret staying. I don't blame myself for believing that loyalty would be enough. But if I could whisper one thing to my younger self, and to anyone listening now, it would be this: don't wait for someone else to give you permission to value your own worth. Looking back, it's clear to me that I wasn't building a legacy so much as I was holding up someone else's dream. And while I loved my family, loved our business, I had to learn that love isn't always enough if it means becoming invisible. That realization didn't come all at once. It crept in quietly over the years. But it's what shaped everything that happened next, for better and for worse. And so as the seasons changed and the years ticked by, I kept showing up first one in, last one out. I thought I was laying the foundation for a future I'd share with the people I loved most. But life, as I'd soon discover, has a way of testing the very structures we trust the most. What do you do when you realize you're not just building someone else's dream, but might be disappearing from your own? That's the question that would shake the ground beneath my feet and send the first quiet cracks through everything I thought was solid. Little did I know, while I was busy being the silent pillar, the winds of change were already gathering just outside our door, ready to blow the whole house sideways. And it would all start, not with me, but with the triumphant return of the golden child. In every family, there's always someone who seems to shine a little brighter sometimes by design, sometimes by circumstance. In ours, it was my younger brother Owen. Where I was steady and quiet, Owen was a spark, always curious, always restless, always dreaming a little bigger. He left home the summer after high school, heading west with a duffel bag, a guitar, and a head full of grand ideas. At first, he called every Sunday, telling stories of internships and city lights, promising he'd be back someday to help run the business. We all missed him, of course, but I secretly felt a little lighter. For the first time, the office was calm. My parents finally seemed to notice the work I was doing. I thought maybe this was my chance to grow into my own space. But life has a way of rebalancing old equations. The year Owen's startup fizzled out, he returned home to a hero's welcome. My parents threw a barbecue in his honor, inviting half the town celebrating not just his return, but the promise he still carried. Owen's going to take us into the future, my father declared, lifting a glass as the sun set behind the sycamores. I smiled and handed out napkins, telling myself this was just a phase Owen would settle in, find his place, and I'd keep mine. But things began to shift quietly at first, like a house settling in a new season. There's a particular ache that comes when you realize you're being compared not to strangers, but to someone you love. My parents never said it outright, but the message was always there. Owen had vision. I had reliability. He was the idea guy, the one with big dreams and new technology. I was the backbone, the safe bet, the one who got things done. There's a certain pride in being reliable, but it's easy to feel small when the spotlight lands elsewhere. I found myself shrinking, second-guessing my instincts, wondering if maybe I was just a placeholder, keeping the seat warm for the real leader. This isn't just our story. All across America, you'll find family businesses with similar patterns. The prodigal son or daughter returns from the city bringing fresh ideas, and suddenly the steady hands are overlooked. I once met a florist in St. Paul who ran her mother's shop for 10 years while her brother pursued an MBA. When he came back, he was immediately put in charge of marketing, despite knowing nothing about floral arrangements. They called him the rainmaker, she said, shaking her head. But I was the one keeping the plants alive. Her laughter was gentle, but I could see the truth in her eyes. It's easy to blame our parents for this, to see only favoritism or bias. But sometimes it's deeper than that, shaped by tradition, by old hopes and invisible fears. In our family, it wasn't about love or even trust. My father grew up believing men should lead and women should nurture. He never said it aloud, but it was there in every good job kiddo. And every time he told Owen, "You're just like me." My mother, caught in the middle, tried to smooth the edges. "Give him time," she'd whisper. "He's still finding his way." I nodded, even when I felt lost myself. If I'm honest, I wanted to be angry. Sometimes I was, but mostly I was sad. I remembered every late night, every early morning, every spreadsheet balanced and deadline met. I wanted someone to look at me and say, "We couldn't have done this without you." Instead, I got polite nods and a gentle reminder that Owen's bringing in the new clients now. The world, it seemed, always had room for visionaries, but not always for the scaffolding that held their dreams aloft. A mistake many of us make is thinking that if we just work harder, if we're just a little more patient, eventually we'll be seen. But sometimes effort isn't enough to break through a wall built out of old expectations. I saw it in my friend Maria, who managed her family's bakery while her younger brother started a food truck in Portland. When he failed and came home, her parents handed him the bakery keys. It broke something in me, she told me, not because I wanted all the glory, but because I'd given so much and it was never enough. The lesson is a hard one. Sometimes no amount of quiet excellence will win you the prize reserved for those who fit the story other people want to tell. And that's not just unfair, it's a slow, steady heartbreak. The world is full of people, especially women who become the backbone and then disappear, their efforts receding behind someone else's spotlight. If this sounds familiar, please know your value isn't measured by applause, and your worth isn't defined by whether someone else finally notices. Still, I clung to hope. Maybe Owen's vision and my steady hand could work together, I told myself. Maybe there was room for both of us, if only we could learn to listen. So I stayed. I listened to Owen's ideas, helped him shape his pitches, and covered for his mistakes when clients got restless. My father called it teamwork. Sometimes it felt more like holding my breath. But as the months rolled by, the differences in how we were treated became harder to ignore. Owen's slip-ups were learning opportunities. My routines were just what's expected. When I suggested new processes or offered advice, it was nagging. When Owen did, it was innovation. It wasn't all bad. Owen meant well, and he tried to include me when he remembered. But the balance had shifted. The ground beneath my feet felt less stable, more like quicksand than solid earth. The small things started to sting most. Family dinners where Owen led the conversation and I cleared the plates. Meetings where my notes were used but my name never mentioned. Holidays where Owen's adventures became the centerpiece and my quiet reliability was just the backdrop. I learned to swallow the ache, to smile through the discomfort, and to keep moving forward, hoping still that one day things would change. If I could offer a piece of advice to anyone living in someone else's shadow, it would be this: don't confuse being indispensable with being truly valued. It's easy to become so essential to others' comfort that your own dreams fade away. But every person deserves more than just a supporting role in their own life. Looking back, I wish I'd spoken up sooner, asked for what I needed, set boundaries. But at the time, I was afraid of disappointing my parents, of losing the fragile piece that held us together, of what might happen if I reached for more. So I waited quietly, hoping the balance would return. What I didn't know was that the real test was just around the corner. The family would soon make a decision that would force me to confront everything I'd been avoiding about my worth, my place, and what I was willing to accept. And when that day came, no amount of patience or loyalty would be enough to soften the blow. Sometimes the cracks in a family's foundation don't appear all at once. They grow silently beneath the surface until one day everything you thought was solid suddenly shifts. And all it takes is a single discovery to bring the whole house of cards tumbling down. Some changes in life are gradual, a slow dimming of light at sunset, a gentle shift in seasons. Others arrive like a thunderclap, sudden and unkind. For me, the shift happened on an ordinary Thursday morning when I was searching for a missing invoice in our back office. I remember how quiet the room was, how the dust motes spun in the sunlight as I rifled through drawers and folders, certain that if I just looked hard enough, I'd find what I was missing. I never imagined I'd find something far more important, a secret that would shake the foundation of everything I thought I knew. My fingers landed on a file labeled Internal Transfers. At first, I nearly set it aside. We kept dozens of folders like this: routine paperwork, legal notices, the kind of details I managed every day without much thought. But something about this folder felt off. The tab was newer than the rest, the label printed, not handwritten. I flipped it open, expecting a list of recent supply orders, but instead I found a document with signatures at the bottom: my father's, my mother's, and Owen's. The words "transfer of ownership" stared up at me, bold and final. Walker and Son Construction 80% to Owen Walker, 20% to Henry and Marjorie Walker. My name was nowhere to be found. For a moment I just stared, waiting for the world to right itself. Surely this was a mistake, I thought. Maybe another Owen, another Walker, some legal language I didn't understand. But the truth was clear. While I'd been filing balancing budgets and patching holes in the company's foundation, my family had made plans, big life-altering plans, without me. They'd signed away not just the company, but the legacy I thought I was helping to build. All with a few strokes of a pen hidden in a drawer I wasn't meant to open. Shock has a way of numbing you at first, but beneath it comes a rush of other emotions: confusion, anger, grief. I closed the folder, heart pounding, and walked out of the office into the pale afternoon light. The street was the same as it had always been, but I felt like a stranger in my own life. For hours, I wandered the old neighborhood, replaying every conversation of the last year, every meeting where I'd been praised for my reliability. Had there been clues I'd missed? Hushed voices, averted eyes? It's easy after the fact to see the signs you ignored because you trusted too much. When I finally made it home that evening, my mother was in the kitchen stirring a pot of soup, humming softly to herself. I wanted to shout, to demand answers, to hold up the folder and ask why, but instead I just stood there quiet and trembling. My father was in his chair reading the paper, Owen on the porch with his laptop. Life went on as usual for everyone but me. And that's the way it often is, isn't it? The world doesn't stop when your heart breaks. It just keeps spinning indifferent and unchanged. This kind of betrayal isn't rare. I've since heard dozens of stories, adult children written out of wills, long-serving employees, quietly replaced partners, excluded from decisions that shape their futures. In family businesses especially, these wounds cut deep. A friend once told me about her cousin who'd spent years running her parents' restaurant. When her younger brother returned from college, he was given the keys, no questions asked. It wasn't about the money, she said. It was about being erased from my own story. I felt the same sting, the realization that all my work, all my loyalty could be swept away by people I loved most. What I learned in that moment is that silence can be as painful as a harsh word. My family didn't confront me. They simply went on assuming I'd never know, or that if I found out, I'd accept it with grace. They mistook my steadiness for acquiescence, my quiet for agreement. But there's a difference between being agreeable and being invisible. And sometimes invisibility is a wound that takes a long time to heal. If you've ever discovered a truth that changed everything, an email, a conversation overheard, a file left out by accident, you know the cold wash of realization that follows. It's as if the ground drops away, and suddenly you're falling unsure where you'll land. In those moments, it's tempting to blame yourself. Why didn't I see this coming? Was I not enough? But here's what I want you to remember. Trust is a gift, not a weakness. To love openly, to show up every day is brave, not naive. The lesson here isn't just about betrayal. It's about the courage to face the truth, even when it breaks your heart. There is dignity in seeing clearly, in refusing to let others write your ending. I could have confronted my family that night, demanded apologies, explanations, maybe even justice. But I didn't. Not because I was weak, but because I needed time to grieve. To mourn not just the loss of a company, but the loss of the story I thought we were writing together. That night, I sat alone in my room, the folder on my lap, the house quiet around me. I realized I had a choice. I could stay silent, swallow my pain, and keep playing the role I'd always played. Or I could step into the light, ask for what I deserved, and risk everything for a chance to be truly seen. Neither path would be easy. Both would come with a cost. Looking back, I know now that every story has a turning point, a moment when the character must decide who they are and what they're willing to fight for. This was mine. For years, I had built the business quietly, trusting that my devotion would one day be rewarded. But in the end, it wasn't my loyalty that mattered to my family. It was their comfort, their convenience, their chosen story. If I wanted more, I would have to claim it for myself. As I drifted off to sleep that night, I understood maybe for the first time that love and loyalty are not always enough. Sometimes the people you trust most will let you down, not out of malice, but out of blindness or habit. And when that happens, you must decide whether to let their version of the story become your own or to begin writing a new chapter for yourself. The next day, I woke with a sense of clarity I hadn't felt in years. The pain was still there, but beneath it was a quiet determination. I didn't know yet what I would do, only that I couldn't go back to being invisible. Sometimes the bravest step is the first one away from the world you've always known. And so with trembling hands and an aching heart, I prepared to walk away. There are moments in life when a single decision quietly divides everything into before and after. That morning, as I stood in the soft light of my bedroom, the folder from the office pressed to my chest, I felt something inside me shift. I thought about the endless years of loyalty, about every night I'd stayed late to finish someone else's work, every weekend I'd missed with friends, because the business couldn't run without me. all at once I saw how small I'd made myself to fit into the space my family had left for me. The idea of leaving was terrifying, but staying knowing what I now knew felt like a slow unraveling. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do isn't to fight for a seat at the table, but to step away entirely and see who notices the empty chair. It's hard to explain the feeling of walking out on something you've given your whole heart to. The world outside looks exactly the same. The trees are still green, the sun still rises, but every step feels foreign. That morning, I walked into the office with my resignation letter folded neatly in my bag. My hand shook, but my resolve didn't waver. I handed the letter to my father, looked him in the eye, and told him I was done. There were no fireworks, no dramatic arguments, just a stunned silence, as if no one believed I'd really do it. In families like ours, people who leave are rare. People who speak up are rarer still. I left behind more than just a job that day. I left behind the identity I'd carefully crafted, the dependable one, the fixer, the person who made herself smaller so others could feel bigger. The first few days were the hardest. I woke up early out of habit and reached for my phone ready to check messages that were no longer mine to answer. I tried to fill my hours with errands and small projects, but everything felt unmoored. Grief has many faces. Sometimes it's sadness. Sometimes it's anger. But often it's just an empty space where certainty used to be. I realized that I was mourning not just the loss of a role, but the loss of the future I'd imagined for myself. Leaving isn't always a loud or obvious act. Sometimes it happens in a quiet moment, signing your name at the bottom of a letter, turning in your keys, or simply walking away without a word. I remembered the story of my friend Ben, whose family ran a small-town hardware store in upstate New York. For years, Ben worked under his older brother, doing the hardest jobs for the least praise. One day, after a particularly hard week, he packed his things and left a note on the counter, "I can't be invisible anymore." His family was shocked, but Ben told me later that it was the first time he'd ever felt truly free. "I didn't know who I was without them," he said, "but I was ready to find out." It's tempting in moments like these to wonder if you've made a mistake. The voices in your head will whisper that you're letting everyone down, that you're selfish, that you'll never find a place that fits, as well as the one you've just left. But I've come to believe that these doubts are a sign you're moving in the right direction. If everything you've ever known is comfortable, maybe you're not growing. Maybe you're just repeating someone else's story. It takes courage to risk discomfort for the sake of your own well-being, to let go of a good enough life in search of something better. There's a lesson here if you're willing to hear it. Sometimes the world around you won't change until you do. For years, I waited for my family to see me differently, to value my contributions, to make room for my dreams. But change doesn't always come from outside. It starts the moment you say, "This isn't enough. I deserve more." Walking away was the first step toward reclaiming my voice. It wasn't easy and it wasn't painless, but it was the only way to find out who I could become if I stopped living in the shadows. I thought about all the other people I'd met who had made the same hard choice. My cousin Allison left the family farm to study architecture in the city. For months, her parents didn't speak to her, certain she'd return home. But Allison built a new life, brick by brick, in a place where her talents were finally seen. Years later, her family visited her office for the first time, marveling at the building she'd helped design. "You were brave," her mother told her. "We just didn't understand until now. Sometimes it takes walking away for others to see your worth too." The first days of my new freedom were filled with small, tender acts of self-care. I took long walks in the park, cooked meals, just for myself, read books I'd been meaning to read for years. There was a kind of healing in the quiet, a chance to remember who I was before I became the person my family needed me to be. Each day I felt a little stronger, a little less afraid. The world didn't fall apart without me. The sun still rose, the birds still sang, and I found slowly that my life was still my own to shape. If I could share anything with someone standing at a crossroads, wondering if it's time to leave a place that no longer sees them, it would be this trust that you are more than the role you play. Your worth isn't tied to the approval of those who can't see your light. And even if you don't know what's next, you are brave for asking the question. Looking back, I realized that walking away wasn't the end. It was the beginning, the start of a journey towards something new, Something unknown, something that might finally belong to me. I didn't know what I would find on the other side of that decision, but I was ready to discover it. Sometimes the only way to be truly seen is to leave behind the places where you've become invisible. What I didn't realize then was just how quickly the absence of one quiet, steady presence could change the entire landscape. As I stepped out into my own life for the first time, the cracks I'd left behind in the family business began to widen, and the company I'd once held together started to come undone. For years, I had quietly believed that nothing in the family business would really change if I left. In the early days after my departure, I wondered if anyone would notice. Maybe they'd simply assign my tasks to someone else, shuffle the papers, send the invoices, answer the phones, and life would go on. But there's a funny thing about being the glue once you're gone. The pieces start to slip apart in ways you never expected. At first, the signs were subtle: a misplaced client order, a payroll mix-up, an unanswered email from a longtime supplier. Small things easily explained away the kind of hiccups that happen in any business. But as the days turned into weeks, the cracks grew wider, and the company's once steady rhythm faltered. It started with the Nelson Project, a home renovation we'd been preparing for months. I used to keep meticulous records tracking every detail from permits to paint colors, keeping clients informed, soothing their nerves when inevitable delays arose. Without me, the paperwork was a mess. Owen, eager to prove himself, tried to handle it all, but missed the city's inspection deadline. The Nelsons' longtime family friends grew frustrated. We thought Lydia was still managing things, Mrs. Nelson told my mother over the phone. She always kept us in the loop. I heard about it third hand, sitting in a cafe on the other side of town sipping coffee, as the world I'd left behind started to unravel. Part of me wanted to rush back and fix it, but another part of me, the part learning to set boundaries, stayed silent. The problems didn't stop there. Staff turnover, once a rare event, became frequent as team members struggled with unclear expectations and shifting leadership. I had always believed in quiet leadership showing up early, listening, guiding, without making a fuss. Owen's approach was different, bold, ambitious, sometimes scattered. He meant well, but he hadn't learned the rhythms of the business, the relationships built over years of shared effort. Deadlines slipped. Budgets ballooned. A trusted electrician took another job after a paycheck arrived late. Even the smallest businesses depend on a network of trust, and trust once lost is hard to rebuild. If you've ever left a place where you were indispensable, you may know this feeling watching from a distance as the holes you once filled become visible to everyone else. I remembered a story my neighbor Susan once told me. She had managed the front desk at her dentist's office for nearly 2 decades. When she retired, they hired 2 new people to replace her, and still things fell through the cracks. Appointment reminders went unsent. Bills were late. Patients complained. It's humbling, Susan said, to realize how much you matter only after you're gone. There's both pain and pride in seeing your absence so clearly. For my family, the realization came gradually. My mother tried to smooth things over, calling old clients to reassure them, while my father grew quieter, his confidence shaken. Owen threw himself into every crisis, working late, skipping meals, determined to fix what he barely understood. But being a leader isn't just about stepping up in emergencies, it's about building systems, listening, and honoring the experience of those around you. Without the quiet, patient glue, everything started to creak. There's a lesson here, one that goes far beyond business. So often we take the people who make our lives easier for granted. We forget to thank the friend who always remembers birthdays, the coworker who fills the coffee pot, the partner who folds the laundry. We assume they'll always be there because they always have been. But when those people finally step away, the emptiness they leave behind can echo for a long time. It's a reminder to look up and see the everyday heroes who make our worlds turn, and to appreciate them while we still can. I'd be lying if I said I didn't feel a little vindicated. It's natural to want your absence to be noticed, especially after years of being overlooked. But the deeper truth is more complicated. Watching my family struggle, I felt both sorrow and hope. Sorrow because I loved them, and it hurt to see our hard work fall apart. Hope because sometimes things have to break before they can be rebuilt. Sometimes the cracks let in new light. Even as I kept my distance, the phone began to ring. A junior project manager emailed to ask if I could clarify the billing process for a stalled renovation. An old client left a voicemail confused about a delayed delivery. Each message was a small plea, a thread tying me back to the world I'd left behind. I listened but didn't reply. This wasn't my job anymore. For the first time, I could choose how much of myself to give. If you're ever tempted to step back into a broken system, remember this fixing. Everything isn't always your responsibility. Sometimes the kindest thing you can do is allow others to face the consequences of their choices. Only then can real change begin. It's hard to watch people you love struggle, but growth for them and for you often starts at the edge of discomfort. The days grew longer. The business wobbled, but it didn't collapse. My family learned to ask for help, to listen more, to recognize what had once been invisible. Owen, for all his ambition, started to slow down, to pay attention, to realize that vision alone can't replace wisdom earned through years of care. Even my parents, once so certain of their choices, began to see me in a new light, not just as the reliable one, but as someone whose absence meant something. And so as spring faded into summer, I watched from afar, learning the hardest lesson of all. Sometimes the only way to be valued is to leave space for your absence, to teach what your presence never could. Life moves forward. People grow, change, and if they're lucky, learn to honor the foundations they once took for granted. I didn't know it yet, but as the dust settled in the wake of my departure, new opportunities were waiting just beyond the horizon. Sometimes the end of one story is only the beginning of another if you're brave enough to look forward instead of back. When you spend years building your life around what others need, it can feel almost impossible to imagine a different future. For weeks after I left, my days felt oddly quiet, as if someone had turned down the volume on the world. Without the constant pull of deadlines and family expectations, I found myself with time to rest, to walk, to think, and to wonder, who was I really, outside of all the roles I'd played? At first, the silence was unnerving, like stepping onto a stage and realizing the audience has left. But slowly, that quiet became a kind of comfort, and I started to listen for the small voice inside that had so often gone unheard. It was during one of those long walks that I first bumped into Ellen, an old friend from high school, who'd started her own business, renovating historic homes. We met at a neighborhood coffee shop, and as we caught up, she shared stories of her own battles, fighting for contracts, struggling to be taken seriously in a male-dominated field, building her team from the ground up. "Honestly, Lydia," she said, stirring her coffee, "I always wished I had someone with your sense for details and people." She paused, looking at me with real intent. "Would you ever consider working with me? I think we could do something great together." For a moment, I was speechless. In my old life, opportunities always came tied to family, to obligation. This was different. This was someone choosing me not for my loyalty, but for my talent. That conversation with Ellen sparked something new. For the first time in years, I felt a flicker of excitement about the future. I didn't say yes right away. I was still hesitant, afraid of repeating old patterns of pouring myself into another venture, only to be overlooked again. But Ellen was patient. She asked for my input on a small project restoring the original woodwork in a Victorian cottage downtown. It wasn't glamorous work, but it was satisfying in a way that surprised me. My ideas were valued, my contributions acknowledged, and my name appeared in the project brief right alongside Ellen's. It felt like stepping out into the sun after a long winter. This experience reminded me of a story I'd read about Steve, a chef who left his family's restaurant after years of being underappreciated. He worried no one would hire him, that he'd lost his edge, but soon a new restaurant in town offered him a chance to create his own menu. The difference was immediate. Steve's signature dishes started drawing crowds, and for the first time he was recognized not just as the son, but as a creator in his own right. Sometimes it takes a change of scenery for people to see what you're truly capable of. Sometimes the right opportunity finds you when you're ready to receive it. As the weeks went by, Ellen and I worked together on a handful of small projects. I discovered I had a knack for problem solving, for organizing chaos into order, for making both clients and craftspeople feel heard. The work was hard, but it was also freeing. There were no old stories holding me back, no unspoken rules about where I belonged. For the first time in my adult life, I wasn't being measured against anyone else's standard. I was simply myself, no more, no less. If there's one thing I wish I could share with everyone who's ever felt invisible, it's this: there's a world of difference between being needed and being wanted. Being needed often feels safe. It gives us a purpose, a reason to stay. But being wanted is transformative. It's an affirmation that your unique gifts are recognized and valued, not just tolerated. In those months, I learned to say yes to the right things and no to the rest. I learned to recognize the feeling of being appreciated and to seek it out instead of settling for the comfort of old routines. I also learned that fear doesn't vanish overnight. I still found myself second-guessing, worrying that I might disappoint Ellen, or that I'd miss some hidden detail. But each time I shared an idea and it was met with enthusiasm, each time a project wrapped up successfully, a little more of that old fear dissolved. Bit by bit, my confidence grew. I started believing in my own voice again, not just as the fixer or the reliable one, but as a true collaborator. It helped to remember the stories of others who'd made similar leaps. My cousin Jamie, for example, had worked for years as an assistant coach on her college's basketball team. When she was finally offered a head coaching job at a different school, she hesitated, unsure she was ready. But with encouragement from friends, she stepped into the new role and thrived. It was the first time anyone believed in me just for being me, Jamie told me. And that made all the difference. Listening to her, I realized we all need that moment, the chance to stand in our own light without apology or explanation. The lesson I carried with me was simple, but profound. The world is bigger than the boundaries we inherit. When we let go of the fear that keeps us stuck, we make space for new opportunities, some that we never could have imagined. Letting go of my old role in the family business was one of the hardest things I've ever done, but it cleared the way for a life where I could finally be recognized on my own terms. And isn't that what we all want deep down? Not just to be needed, but to be truly, deeply wanted. As summer unfolded, I found myself waking up excited for each new day, eager to see what we could build next. My relationship with Ellen grew into a real partnership, one based on trust, respect, and a shared sense of possibility. I started to believe that my past didn't define my future and that the world was full of places where I could belong. Little did I know the journey wasn't over yet. Just as I was finding my footing in this new chapter, a message from home would arrive, one that would test everything I'd learned about boundaries, value, and the courage to negotiate for what I truly deserved. When the message finally came, I was in the middle of sanding old window frames on one of Ellen's projects, a quiet golden afternoon sawdust catching the light. The ringtone startled me, and I almost didn't answer. My father's voice was clipped and tired, asking if I could meet him and Owen at the old family office. "We want to talk things through," he said, and I could hear both hope and hesitation between the words. For a moment, the old Lydia, the one who never wanted to let anyone down, wanted to rush back and fix everything. But the new me, the one learning to trust her own value, hesitated. This time, if I was going to sit at the table, it had to be on my own terms. Negotiation isn't just about numbers and contracts, it's about boundaries. I spent the night before the meeting talking things through with Ellen, who listened and encouraged me to write down what I wanted. Not just what the business needed, but what I needed: real ownership, a meaningful role, clear decision-making power, and above all, the ability to protect my time and well-being. For the first time, I allowed myself to imagine being treated as an equal, not an afterthought. It was both thrilling and terrifying. The truth is, for many of us, asking for what we deserve feels almost rebellious, especially in families where self-sacrifice is the silent expectation. That next day, the office felt different. I noticed the dust in the corners, the faded paint on the front door, the uneasy way my father greeted me. Owen was there, too, less confident than I'd remembered, fidgeting with a pen. We made small talk at first, but soon the conversation turned serious. "We need you," my father admitted, and there was no hiding the strain in his voice. "Things haven't been the same." I listened, grateful for the honesty, but determined not to slide back into my old habits. Instead, I opened the folder I'd brought with me, my notes, my hopes, my requirements. "If you want me back," I said gently, "these are the conditions." I listed them one by one, voice steady, but kind equity in the company. A seat on the board, limits on working hours, clear responsibility and authority. The room went quiet. My father looked at Owen, who nodded slowly. It was clear they hadn't expected this, at least not from me. There's a power in speaking plainly, an unexpected weight to clear requests. In that silence, I remembered stories from others who had stood up for themselves after years of staying small, like my friend Rochelle, who managed her parents' diner for years. When her father grew ill and her brother returned, Rochelle asked to become a partner instead of just an employee. The negotiation was hard, but ultimately her family realized the diner would not survive without her vision and stability. Today, Rochelle is not only a partner, but the heart of the business, mentoring new staff and shaping the menu. The first time I said what I wanted, she told me I shook the whole way home, but I've never been prouder. There's a lesson in all this one I wish someone had shared with me years before: boundaries are not walls to keep people out, but fences to show where we truly begin. When we set them with love and clarity, we create space for honest relationships and real respect. In families especially, it's easy to fall into patterns where certain voices are always loudest and others are expected to bend. But leadership isn't about pleasing everyone. It's about knowing yourself well enough to say yes and no at the right times. Of course, negotiations are never easy, especially when the stakes are personal. My family hesitated, debated, asked for compromise. I listened, but I didn't back down. We discussed and argued, but I was firm about what mattered: shared decision-making, sustainable hours, and a stake in the company's success. For the first time, I saw my father really listening, not just to my words, but to the person behind them. Owen, too, admitted that his confidence had been shaken by how hard things had become without me. "You always made it look easy," he said quietly. It was the first time I'd heard him say that. By the end of the meeting, we had reached an agreement, a true partnership one that recognized both my experience and my worth. I can't pretend that everything was suddenly perfect, or that old wounds healed overnight. But I left the office that day with my head high, knowing that I had asked for what I needed and been met at last with respect. If you're reading this and thinking about your own boundaries at work, at home, and your friendships, I hope you'll take this lesson to heart. The right people won't leave when you show them your limits. Instead, they'll learn where you end and they begin. And in that space, something new and beautiful can grow: trust, respect, and real collaboration. Driving home that day, I felt lighter than I had in years. I rolled down the window, letting the wind tangle my hair, and thought about all the times I'd been afraid to ask for more. It's never easy to change old patterns, but the rewards, the chance to shape your own life, are worth every moment of discomfort. And so, with new agreements in place, I prepared to return to the family business, not as a caretaker or silent partner, but as a co-leader ready to help rebuild from the inside out. But even the best contracts can't rewrite the past. Healing old hurts would take more than signatures. It would require honesty, forgiveness, and a willingness to build something new together. Returning to the family business was nothing like I imagined. On paper, the agreement was clear. My role was now official, my voice equally weighted, and my boundaries protected. But stepping back into familiar rooms after so much change felt strangely foreign. The first morning, I unlocked the office door, breathing in the scent of old wood and paper, listening to the hum of the building coming alive. I paused in the hallway, letting the memories flood back: late nights, balancing the books, laughter over shared sandwiches, and quieter moments of disappointment I'd learned to swallow. Everything looked the same, but the air was different, charged with the possibility of something new and the ache of all that had come before. The first team meeting was awkward at best. Old colleagues welcomed me with cautious smiles, unsure if the old patterns would return. My parents lingered in the back of the room, quieter than usual. Owen gave updates in a more measured tone, pausing to ask for my input. I appreciated the gesture, but I could feel the years of unspoken tension, the old roles lurking just beneath the surface. Change, I realized, doesn't arrive with a signature. It's built slowly, intentionally, one conversation at a time. After the meeting, I invited my parents and Owen to stay behind. If we're really going to start fresh, we need to talk about what happened. We gathered around the conference table, sunlight pooling on the scratched wood between us. No one spoke at first. My mother fidgeted with her wedding band. My father stared out the window. Owen tapped his fingers nervously. Finally, I broke the silence. I need to say this, even if it's hard. When you made decisions about the company without me, it made me feel invisible. I want us to move forward, but I can't do that unless we talk honestly about the past. For a moment, the only sound was the distant buzz of a delivery truck outside. My father cleared his throat, his voice low and rough. I thought I was doing what was best for the company, for the family. I see now that I hurt you. That wasn't my intention. He looked at me. Really looked for the first time in years. I'm sorry, Lydia. My mother's eyes filled with tears. I was so afraid of rocking the boat, she admitted, but by staying silent, I let you carry too much alone. Even Owen, who had always been quick to move past discomfort, spoke up. I wish I'd listened more. I didn't realize how much you were holding together. The apologies weren't perfect, but they were real. In that moment, something old and heavy began to lift. It's easy to underestimate the power of an honest apology. So often, families avoid hard conversations thinking time alone will heal old wounds. But time only buries pain deeper. I remembered a story Ellen once told me about her grandfather and uncle, who ran a bakery together but stopped speaking after a misunderstanding about money. For years, birthdays and holidays passed in silence, until one Thanksgiving, when the uncle, hands shaking, finally said, "I'm sorry I didn't trust you." Ellen said it was like a dam-breaking tears laughter and the first real family meal in years. Forgiveness isn't easy, but it's necessary for anything new to grow. In our own way, my family and I began to rebuild. The first few weeks were filled with small but important changes. Family dinners where everyone got a turn to speak, meetings where my input was not just welcomed, but expected, and gentle reminders to check in on each other, not just as colleagues, but as people. Old habits tried to creep back in. Sometimes my father would slip into giving Owen all the praise, or my mother would default to smoothing things over instead of facing conflict. But now we named those patterns when they appeared. "Let's try again" became our family mantra. Progress, I realized, wasn't about perfection. It was about persistence. If there's a lesson in these awkward, halting steps, it's that real healing takes courage and patience. It's not about pretending the past never happened or rushing to erase old hurt. It's about standing together in the messiness of the present and choosing over and over to do better. For anyone hoping to heal an old family wound, I'd say this: don't wait for the perfect words or the perfect moment. Start small. Speak honestly. Listen deeply. The hardest conversations often make the strongest bridges. Sometimes after a long day, I would linger in the empty office, turning off lights and locking doors, remembering all the versions of myself that had once walked those halls. I'd think of others I knew who had faced family struggles, friends who had rebuilt trust after betrayal, cousins who started fresh after years of misunderstanding. Each story was different, but the thread was the same: relationships can heal if everyone is willing to be honest, vulnerable, and forgive. Looking back, I see that this was the turning point for us, not a dramatic victory, but a quiet decision to begin again together. Apologies don't erase pain, but they open a door. On the other side is a new kind of family, one built on truth, respect, and a shared commitment to move forward. With old wounds aired and the first seeds of forgiveness planted, it was finally time to turn our attention outward to the work itself. Now, side by side as true partners, we face the challenge of rebuilding not just our relationships, but the very foundation of our business. And in doing so, we discovered new strengths we never knew we had. Rebuilding the family business was nothing like starting from scratch. There were cracks in the foundation, old habits, half-healed wounds, lingering doubts that needed tending before any new growth could take hold. Yet for the first time, we weren't pretending those cracks didn't exist. Instead, we brought them into the open, discussing not only what had gone wrong, but how we might do better. The shift was subtle at first team meetings, where everyone's voice counted honest check-ins instead of quiet avoidance and a new willingness to admit mistakes. Change wasn't instant, but it was real, and it came from each of us choosing again and again to show up differently than before. I found myself stepping into my new role as co-leader side by side with Owen. It wasn't always easy. We had different instincts. He thrived on big ideas and client relationships, while I built order and stability behind the scenes. There were times our approaches clashed, like when Owen wanted to overhaul our project management software overnight, and I pushed for a slower, more thoughtful transition. Instead of arguing in circles or retreating into old frustrations, we learned to listen. "Tell me why you think this will work," I'd ask, and Owen would share his vision. Then I'd explain my concerns, and we'd look for common ground. In that process, we discovered that our strengths, once in conflict, could actually complement each other. Sometimes I'd think back to stories I'd heard from other family businesses. My friend Sarah's parents ran a small grocery store with her father focused on sourcing new products and her mother managing the books. For years, they butted heads until they finally created separate areas of responsibility and set a weekly meeting to talk things through. "It saved our marriage," Sarah told me. "We realized we didn't have to lead the same way to be a strong team." Their success wasn't about erasing differences, but about finding ways to make those differences work for everyone. As our own business began to stabilize, we noticed real changes in the people around us. Employees who had been uncertain about the future started offering new ideas. Our longtime clients, who had nearly walked away, commented on how much smoother projects were running. Even the office atmosphere felt different, lighter, more collaborative, less weighed down by silent resentments. I made it a point to check in with staff to recognize effort to ask what they needed. Owen did the same with clients, creating new partnerships and finding fresh opportunities. Slowly, the company grew not just in numbers, but in trust. The lesson I learned during this phase was simple but profound. True leadership is not about control, but about connection. When we lead with humility and openness, admitting what we don't know, listening as much as we speak, we create space for others to step up and shine. The best teams aren't those where everyone thinks alike, but where every voice has value. Looking back, I realized how much we'd all missed out on by clinging to old hierarchies, by assuming only certain kinds of leadership mattered. Now our business had room for more than one vision, more than one style. There were challenges, of course. Some projects hit snags, and old habits sometimes resurfaced. My father would still slip into micromanaging. My mother would worry we were moving too fast. But this time, we met those challenges with honesty. We laughed more, forgave faster, and moved forward together. For the first time, I felt like I belonged not because I fit into someone else's plan, but because I was helping to build something new side by side with my family. One of the most rewarding moments came during a staff meeting when a new hire spoke up with a bold suggestion to improve our workflow. I watched as Owen encouraged her, and as my father nodded his approval, something he might not have done in the past. That moment reminded me of how far we'd come, and of the power of a healthy, supportive work culture. It was never about erasing the past or pretending the hard parts hadn't happened, but about weaving them into the fabric of a better future. If you're facing a period of rebuilding at work, at home, or within yourself, know this healing and progress rarely happen all at once. It's a process of daily choices, small risks, and shared vulnerability. Every time you choose to listen, to invite input, to trust another person's perspective, you lay another brick in a foundation that will hold strong. And if you're lucky, you'll find yourself surrounded by people who see you not just for what you do, but for who you are. As the seasons changed and our company found its footing, I realized that what we'd built wasn't just a stronger business, but a new kind of family. One defined by respect, communication, and the courage to face challenges as a team. We celebrated our wins, learned from our losses, and reminded each other often with a smile that none of us was in this alone. And so, as I looked out across the busy office one quiet afternoon, I knew our story had changed for good. But the journey wasn't over. If anything, it was only beginning. With new strength, deeper bonds, and a newfound sense of self, I was ready finally to write the next chapter on my own terms, and maybe inspire someone else to do the same. Looking back, it's hard to believe how much can change when you decide to stop living in someone else's shadow and start building a story of your own. My journey wasn't about grand gestures or sudden victories, but 1,000 small choices, choosing to value my own work, to walk away from old roles, to forgive where I could, and to speak up for what I needed. Each decision was a brick in the new foundation, not just for our family business, but for the person I was becoming. There were setbacks days when doubt crept in, and moments I wanted to turn back. But I kept moving forward step by step, believing that I could create something better than what I'd left behind. Every chapter of this story, each moment of heartbreak, courage, and connection, taught me something new. I learned that being reliable is a gift, but being truly seen is a right. I learned that boundaries are not a betrayal, but an act of self-respect. And I learned that families like businesses are always works in progress, capable of healing and renewal if we're willing to do the hard, honest work together. Forgiveness doesn't change the past, but it can transform the future. Leadership isn't about doing everything yourself. It's about listening, trusting, and letting others shine. Today, as I sit at my own desk, this time with my name on the door, I don't just see the work that's been done. I see the people who made it possible, the friends who offered encouragement, the colleagues who challenged me, and the family who, despite their flaws, found the courage to change. I'm proud of the business we've rebuilt, but I'm even prouder of the bonds we've restored. The person I am now is someone who knows her worth and isn't afraid to claim it. If my story has touched you, if you've ever felt invisible, unappreciated, or afraid to ask for more, know that you're not alone. You have the right to step into the light, to set your own boundaries, and to write a new ending. It won't always be easy, but I promise you the journey is worth it. And if you're standing at your own crossroads right now, I hope you'll find the courage to take that first step. Thank you for walking this road with me. If this story resonated with you, I'd love to hear your thoughts. What part felt most familiar? Where are you in your own journey? Share your experiences in the comments below. Your voice might be just what someone else needs to hear today. And if you want more stories about family resilience and finding your way, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and ring the bell for updates. Your support means the world to me and helps our community of listeners grow stronger together. Remember, you are more than the role you play. You are the author of your own story, and the best chapters are yet to come.